Hey there folks, I'm OneProperVariant and this is number 21 of the Victoria 3 Dev Diaries. Today we have diplomatic plays, which is a very important tool. Let me tell you right now, having read the Dev Diary, that this is, honestly I haven't used this phrase I think in terms of Victoria 3 in a long time, but this is a revolution of mechanics in grand strategy games, because we are looking at a different relationship between diplomatic actions and warfare compared to how it was in any other game beforehand, except Victoria 2 with crises, but crises still were quite weak on something. Now before we jump into this, I would like to say something completely independent of Victoria 3 and the Dev Diaries and these videos as they are. If you are feeling terrible, if there's anything in your life, please talk to someone. Leave a comment in the comment section. Please send me an email. My email is on my channel page. Please let someone know, even if it's me. Let someone know, talk to them, and just please reach out to someone, okay? With that being said, let's move on to the actual Dev Diary. And let's talk about diplomatic plays. So diplomatic plays basically are the things that you do before you go to war against someone. And it is a very interesting and important mechanic, because this is basically the substitute for how you do warfare and how you start warfare in any other Paradox game. Now, crises, again, are the closest thing that we have to this, and logically it is the closest thing because Wiz has helped develop these crises in Victoria 2 himself. But what is important about these is that this basically substitutes the entire process. If you look at CK3, for example, you need a claim of foreign, whether it is by inheritance or by fabricating a claim. You need something that is going on. Obviously, of course, you can have conquests, you can have other reasons, but you determine what your reason is right before you go in. That is when you do it. You don't really interact with this in any meaningful way beforehand. Most wars that you declare in Victoria 2 are wars that you do based on the fact that you just justified something. Either you lost territory, of course, beforehand, meaning that you are already in a weakened position and you have a claim that naturally comes with it, or you're looking at a situation where you are justifying a war, be it on any given war goal, and then you just move in. So these two steps are entirely removed. EU4 does that as well. You justify something, then you go in. Victoria 2 does it. You justify something, then you go in. CK3 in most circumstances does it as well. Hoi 4, I mean, we don't really need to talk about it. Hoi 4 has a very different warfare culture. In Hoi 4, at most, in most circumstances, let's just phrase it like this, in most circumstances, you're looking at something where you are going in after doing a focus, and the focus basically is a justification. But in reality, and this must be said, I think, in reality, that is not how wars go. You don't go, oh yeah, okay, I would like this, let's just justify this for the public, and then we go in. In reality, there is a lot of intermingling, there's a lot of conversation about this between the powers that be and the powers that are active in this area, and you're going to see that Victoria 3 actually pays this sort of or rather its due diligence has been done here, right? Victoria 3 understands this significantly more than any other game. So let's take a look at it, how it works and why it works so well, but also why I have some balancing issues with it, or rather concerns. War is a continuation of diplomacy, and everything that is achievable by war should also be achievable through diplomacy, even if that diplomacy sometimes comes at the point of a gun. The diplomatic plays allow you to try to achieve any objective normally achievable by war by diplomatic maneuvering to force the other side to give it to you without a fight. To fully explain what I mean by that, we'll go over the mechanics of diplomatic plays in sequence, how they start, how they play out, and finally how they are resolved. So there are three phases. You start one, you're in the main section, and then it ends, right? These are how diplomatic plays go. The way diplomatic plays start is the way you would normally start a war in another Paradox Grand Strategy game, by demanding something from another country, for example, that they cede a particular state to you. In fact, unlike other GSGs, Victoria 3 has no declare war button to get what you demand. This is just amazing. Instead, you start a diplomatic play, and wars are always preceded by diplomatic plays. The 14 opening moves currently available as diplomatic plays, each corresponding with a war goal. As usual, the number in green indicates the number of possible valid targets that exist for that play. So, I feel like this might be China. So yeah, in all honesty, I don't really know who this is, so who we're looking at here, but I don't think it really matters. Basically, the way we need to understand diplomatic plays is, if you have an interest in any given region, so for example, let's say I'm Prussia, I have of course native interest in the regions that I hold land in, which is primarily in Central Europe and primarily within Germany, but if I set as an interest, let's say in, I don't know, India for some reason, for whatever reason, right, I would be in a position where I could then start a diplomatic play there. They are directly connected to your strategic interests. Let's take a look at the diplomatic plays that we have here. Again, these are the 14 that are currently in the game. Annex subject, conquer state, liberate subject, make puppet, make territory, open market, take colony, take treaty port, transfer subject, ban slavery, cut down to size, independence. I'm not entirely certain whether they mean independence for yourself or independence for a third nation, maybe a subject and so on, right? Make vassal and return state. You can see some aren't available here, others are very much available. I mean, taking territory, making territory means making someone your vassal. Territory is a vassal state. Looking at all these things, obviously there are many options here, and many options that are related to your strategic interests in which zone you are, right? So, for example, if I have a vassal in any other game, so Imperator, Victoria, EU4, CK3, I mean, CK3 doesn't really count, vassals work differently there, but in any of those games, even in Hoi 4, annexing a subject that is yours does not work via the, diplomacy, or rather via the warfare screen. This one does, though. So basically think about this just for 1 second. Let's say you have a subject within, Vietnam, for example. The Dai Viet is your vassal as Qing China. Let's say this is what we're looking at here, right? You can annex them, and then if they feel happy about it, they can say, that is good. I can agree with this. That is perfectly reasonable. If they don't agree, this may get to be a war. Think about all the other games that you have. Think about, I mean, Victoria 2 really did vassal relationships very dirty, I think, but think about, for example, Imperator Rome and EU4. And Hoi 4 even, yeah, Hoi 4. In all of those, you need to have certain circumstances, and then you can initiate the annexation of a subject. Only then. For example, I think in Imperator Rome, it's like they must like you by plus 190, or was it plus 150? I can't really remember. But anyway, you need to be in a certain position, and then you do it, and it just works. In Victoria 3, that won't be the case. In Victoria 3, you can say, okay, I want to annex my subject. If they love you, if they say this is great, then they will just be annexed. They will completely accept it. If they don't, and you do it too early, this may become a war. And if it becomes a war, this could be very costly, or it could also just be fast if they're a fairly small subject, right? But I love this. Basically, it has been merged. There are more options now for the circumstances of annexing a subject. And there are more circumstances for diplomatic annexation or diplomatic ceding of provinces, opening markets, and so on. Because if you succeed in your diplomatic play here and don't let it escalate to war, you may just be looking at getting something that otherwise in all other games is only possible via warfare, but via diplomacy. And that is very exciting. So let's just actually step into the context of diplomatic plays, how they work, and why this is such great news for somebody that plays primarily via diplomacy. We're going to have some examples, I think, that I have basically in my mind on how this works, why it works, and why it is so great. Anyway, you can also see that this is clearly the diplomatic play button. So I assume that many of these, maybe this is like build something, this is pass a law, this is build some troops, and this is make a trade deal. What do you think about that? I feel like that sounds quite realistic. And is this a button that just lets you like look at the paper map? Who knows? Now let's take a look at how diplomatic plays actually begin. Once a diplomatic play is started, there's a number of things that happen immediately. First, the country that is being targeted is of course notified. I mean, it only makes sense. Along with any countries that are considered potential participants in the play. Who is considered a potential participant depends on the exact nature of the play, but usually it includes any country with an interest in the strategic region where the play is taking place, so you need an interest in it, as well as countries that have a strong diplomatic reason to get involved, for example, allies or overlords. So there are basically two reasons that you would immediately be notified. You have an interest, and remember, interests are either assigned, you manually say I have an interest in this region, or they are automatically assigned if you have territory, or if one of your vassals has territory in that region that you're looking at. These are the two regions that make it so that you could be a participant that immediately gets basically notified of this going on, right? Very important. At this point, it's important to note that only the initiator, the country starting the play, and target, the country targeted, are active participants. All others just have the potential to take part. I think this makes a lot of sense. You're looking at a situation where there are three phases in the diplomatic play, and in the first phase, it basically just says, I want to dunk on you. And the other country says, I do not want you to dunk on me. And then every other country that is around them, that is involved with them, says, oh, wait a minute. Would I like them to get dunked on or not? I think that is basically the first phase. Next, the primary active participants on each side, so the initiator and the target initially, though this can change if the overlord of either side step into the play. For example, let's say my British colony in India says I would like to declare war on a colony in India, didn't exist at the time, but a colony in India that is a French vassal, right? At that point, the British could step in, and or the French could step in on the other side, meaning then the overlords would take over and say, this has become an escalator, this has become a larger topic, and I want to handle this directly. I think this makes a lot of sense, quite frankly. It's a very nice thing where you are not mandated to come in just because your vassal does anything or is being attacked. You can technically say, hey, I got other stuff to worry about, I am not very interested in solving this issue right now. They are given a number of maneuvers. Maneuvers is this right here. At least I think that is what it is. It makes a lot of sense. This is the Cape Colony, and this is Great Britain. Great Britain gets many, many more maneuvers because they're larger. At least I think that is what that is. This is a currency that primarily depends on rank, with higher rank countries having more maneuvers, and determines how many actions such as swaying and adding demands, more on these below, that said primary participant can take during the course of the play to try and gain the advantage of their enemy. There are 3 distinct phases over which a diplomatic play plays. The first one of these is opening moves, during which participating countries take stock of the situation, set their initial stances, more on that below, and the target has time to set their main demand. The main demand of the initiator has already been set, of course. That is how you started the diplomatic play right here. As it depends, during the opening move phases, it isn't possible for other countries to fully commit to one side or another, with the sole exception of overlords of the primary participants, as mentioned before. It also isn't possible for either side to back down. Cape Colony's bid for independence and open British markets turn out to be a step too far. Britain demands nothing less than total annexation of the colonial upstarts, whose only hope now is either suffering partial annexation for its insolence, or having to get in real close with France and hope for the best. So, we can see the 3 phases here. These are the opening moves, this is the central phase, and then this is the end phase of this escalation. This is basically the escalation measure. You can see it right here. Every day it will progress, and every day it will make it significantly worse. We can see the Cape Colony here. They do not have any naval or military capacities. They could add war goals, so we are the Cape Colony in the screenshot, and what they're demanding is independence and an opening of the British market. Now this is really interesting to me personally. If you are the Cape Colony, and you open, or rather you become independent without opening the British market, what are you going to do? How are you going to survive? You're not really going to survive at all, right? Because all the goods would all of a sudden be incredibly expensive, unreachable for you. So what happens here is, of course, it would make sense. If you were to rebel, you would say, I still want to trade in your market. If you don't do it, then I will literally starve. This is an understandable, albeit very aggressive demand. Now, Great Britain answers, okay, so you have 0 in your capacities. We have 100 and 150 in our, capacities I think is the wrong word. Let's say capabilities, right? So we are very much stronger than you are. We have many more maneuvers, meaning that we can do much, much more, sway a bunch more people against you. So what we're demanding is take Colony, Eastern Cape, Cape Colony, and Northern Cape. We will annex you. You will no longer exist once this is over. Now, for the Cape Colony, there is a lot of potential threat here, I think. You can see that, you know, for example, and there seems to be something that we can scroll down on. Maybe this is, maybe there are more colonies. I'm not entirely certain, but we can see Hanover. At least I think it is Hanover. Look at the horse right here. That is the Hanover horse, no doubt. They also have no capabilities, but then there's France, and they are on the fence. France says, maybe I might want to help the Cape Colony. Weaken Great Britain. Hey, who likes Great Britain, right? I'm France. I do whatever I want. Just 15 years, maybe 20, 30 years, I was conquering the continent. And then Great Britain came in and said, no, you can't do that. Maybe you want to go as France and say, I want to support the Cape Colony. You can't do that in this first phase, but it's a really interesting point of view. In any other grand strategy game, what you're looking at is, for example, Cape Colony saying, Great Britain, we are at war. Boom, we're doing it. And maybe as France, you have an option that says, I want to support you, I want to intervene, that sort of stuff, but there's nothing where you initially can say, I will be supporting you, unless you do it basically into the darkness. So, for example, EU4 has this option, of course, for guarantee independence, other games have that as well, but basically you are just saying, I will guarantee your independence, or I will support you, but I don't know when we're going to war. I have no idea. It's up to the AI. With this play, you as France can basically see, this play is going on, it's currently ramping up. Will I support it? Will I not support it? This is a really interesting dynamic that doesn't exist in any other grand strategy game as far as war is concerned. In any other grand strategy game, and I'll just say this outright, this is revolutionary for how this works, and I don't think that this attitude works for every single game in grand strategy, but where I'm coming from is fundamentally that Victoria 3 appears to be saying, we understand that warfare and diplomacy are tightly connected. You can't just, you know, have it like a board game thing where it's like, in this turn I ally you, and maybe in the next 5 turns you will do something. No. In this one, it is very clear. I will do something, will you support me, will you not support me? This is diplomacy lived. This is diplomacy manifest, if you will. I really am a huge fan of this, I will tell you right now. Let's see how this progresses, right? Let's see how this continues. The diplomatic maneuvering phase is the second phase. By this point, the target has set their main demand. They are if they have not set their main demand, they are automatically given one, usually war reparations, meaning if Great Britain didn't set any of this, it would just usually say war reparations. Okay, fair enough. This is the main phase of the diplomatic play, which occupies the majority of the escalation scale, and during which most of the action takes place. During this place, potential participants can now set any stance towards each side, from full support without requiring anything in return, something most AIs won't be keen to do, as they're not big on having their troops die for charity, at least not in an offensive war, to leaning towards a particular side, which will signal to that side that they will likely willing to be swayed, to simply being on the fence with no particular preference for either side. It is also possible for countries that have not committed to one side or the other to simply declare neutrality and exit the play altogether, though this might have diplomatic consequences depending on the circumstances. I would really love to know what this means exactly. In Victoria 2, of course, there was a consequence. In any other game, if you say, I'm not going to help my proper ally or the country that I just guaranteed independence of, then you just get a malus, basically. But where does this come from? Where does this lead? What is it all about? Now, let's take a look at the screenshot. Very interesting one. With only a fraction of the military strength of Great Qing, Kokkan's future independence looks highly questionable, but this place still has the potential to become pretty complex if Kokkan can convince the Sikh and Russian empires to support their cause against Qing. Perhaps gaining another subject is not worth the risk of a protracted war that might well cost upwards of 500,000 lives. So, we have more maneuvering slots. This is the Great Qing. Then we have Kokkan. They have slightly less, not that much less, but I mean, look at this number. Jesus Christ, look at this number. That is how the Great Qing was doubtlessly active. I believe this is Tibet. They're currently leaning towards the Great Qing. No, actually, is this Nepal? No, honestly, I'm not entirely certain. Who is this? Isn't it? No, I don't think it's Tibet, is it? You tell me, okay? You tell me. Either way, this country is leaning towards the Great Qing. Russia, currently on the fence, not very decided. Then we have... Is this Xinjiang or is this Mongolia? Isn't it one of the two? No, sorry. Oh, wait a minute. Is this the Sikh Empire? This is the Sikh Empire. I'm not sure who either of these are. Either way, you can see the military forces, their capabilities, what might frighten the AI, what should frighten you. You can see all of these. You can see that we are the Great Qing and that we can sway people. Now, what does sway mean? It's such a vague term. We're going to see that in a second. There's a lot going on there. But what is really, really interesting to me is this idea that if we had an ally, they would be at leaning or maybe even supports right here. If, you know, hey, I don't actually know how alliances truly work. We don't really have any insight there. Now, allies are able to be notified, but they're not directly supporting that. We saw that in one of the earlier text segments where it basically stated that only overlords can come in immediately with support. You would hope, of course, that your allies, you know, go and support you properly. But here's the very interesting dynamic on how it continues. Let's read it. The diplomatic maneuvering phase is also when the primary participants are expected to use up their available maneuvers on adding demands and swaying potential participants to their side. It is also possible to spend your maneuvers during the opening move phase on adding demands for yourself. Burning through most of them early might leave you at a significant disadvantage late. So, the maneuvering phase begins. I can say, I want to sway some of the other countries. I feel very secure in who I am and how I can defeat somebody else. That would eat up your maneuvers. Basically different, very, very different from Victoria 2, where you declare war for one war goal. You are now in a position where you basically, in this phase, can say, I want more. I want to have more. You can also alternatively sway somebody else by promising them, for example, land, by promising them obligations that you want to hand them, you know, if you are in a position of actually winning the war. All of these things are now possible in this pre-war phase. Wasn't really possible at all in Victoria 2 or in, again, any other grand strategy game. They just don't really work that way. This is really cool. I think there's a lot of content here that is added to, again, how warfare and diplomacy interact with one another. I am a huge, huge fan. This is a massive step up from both Victoria 2, but also from any warfare declaration system that we have, because this doesn't need to end in warfare declaration. This can end in an actual system of, hey, look at this, we are, you know, just resolving this peacefully because the other side says they are too weak. Also, interestingly enough, this is a much, much better system than EU4's system of promising something, Because let's be real here, in EU4, you can just give them garbage. In this system, you will have to promise them specific provinces. And you can see my face light up red because of the screen. Let's continue. Demands are essentially war goals and will turn into such if the play escalates into war, but more on that later, and include a wide variety of requests under the rest, such as ceding land, giving up claims, or becoming a subject. Only the primary participants can add demands, but in addition to demanding things on their own behalf, they can also demand things on behalf of other countries backing them, if said country agrees that the demand is something they want. So basically, if you feel like you want Russia on your side as the Great Qing, you can promise them that they can, have a vassal out of Kokand. No, sorry, we're actually vassalizing Kokand. Maybe one of the other enemies, right? If anybody joins them, we can promise them land from the enemy right there, if they indeed do want that land. So that is quite interesting. That is a mechanic that we, again, haven't seen anywhere else. We can make vague promises in other games, but never this very precise. You can get X or you can get Y. Adding certain aggressive demands, such as demanding land, always results in a diplomatic incident. Remember, diplomatic incidents give you negative relations with people with strategic interest in that zone, and they give you infamy, which will immediately give you infamy and may degrade relations with countries you need to support you in the play. Being seen as greedy and unreasonable in your demands will in itself make it harder to get countries to back you up, and may in fact make it so undecided participants side against you just to put a stop on your mad dreams of conquest. Very reasonable. Hey, you feel the extent of you basically over-blobbing, of being too much of an hegemon on the world stage, right? You see that directly before you go to war. You see it immediately. If you as Germany, right, say, hey, France, or rather if you as Prussia say, I want Alsace-Lorraine, and that's it. We're just going to unify. It's all good. Great Britain will say, oh yeah, that's cool. You go ahead. I don't like France either. If you want Alsace-Lorraine, and then 3 other states as well, Great Britain may say, wait a minute. It's not 1939. This is a bit too early for this. I will oppose you. And then they will oppose you. If you don't demand that and then say to Great Britain, hey, Great Britain, what would you like? Maybe French colonies? Maybe Normandy? How do you feel about Normandy? Great Britain might just say, hey, you know what? That's an aggressive demand, but in my favor. I like it. I'll be joining you. This is a mechanic that we simply haven't seen like this before. Seriously, the connection between diplomacy and warfare is so tight. Much, much tighter than anything else that we have seen in these games, and I very much hope, although again warfare doesn't work in the same way as it does in the Victorian era, in all eras, I hope that this connection between diplomacy and warfare is found in all other games as well going forward. Where were we? The infamy from any demands or war goals that end up not being pressed for any reason is partially or fully refunded, though the negative impact on relations remains. So basically, you demanding this still makes people uncomfortable with you in the room, but at the same time they say, yeah, you're not that infamous, you didn't do that. You just wanted it, but you didn't do that. And I think that is also a good compromise. Swaying, on the other hand, so if you sway a country to your side, is the main way in which the primary participants get undecided participants over to their side by making them a promise. This promise may be in the form of owing them an obligation, more on this in a later dev diary, or promising them a war goal if the play escalates into war. I would assume that swaying someone, you could probably do that as well if you have obligations, right? If another country owes you something, you can say, hey, come over here, come on, let me do this, right? At least I would hope so. Either way, it doesn't really matter. That's all day-to-day balancing politics. There's a few more such types of promises planned for release, promising to become their protectorate or giving them a piece of land or a subject of yours, for example. So, for example, you could say, hey, I'm Russia, or rather, I'm the Ottomans, I want you to, come to my aid, I want to go to war with you together, dear Austrian, Hungary Empire, Austria, you're gonna get Bosnia. Right? You're gonna get Bosnia, and in exchange, I get the Caucasus from Russia. Hey, isn't that fair? And Austria might say, yeah, that's great. And then you will all of a sudden have an alliance that didn't exist in real life, very much didn't exist in real life, and then, they could work together against Russia. Very interesting. Again, this isn't in yet. You can't promise your own land yet, but in the future, I would love that. These are not yet implemented. If the country agrees, they will be set as backing the swaying side in the diplomatic play, and will fight on their side if war breaks out, just as if they voluntarily set their stance to backing that side. Right. This is apparently the view of France, and France talks to Prussia against a war, or rather for a war against Austria. Nice Austrian flag, by the way. And we can offer them West Galicia, Moravia, and Bohemia. We could also offer them any of these, and they will cost different maneuver points, because of course Bohemia is more populated, more industrialized than, for example, Moravia or West Galicia, but they don't want any of these because none of these are connected to Prussia itself. Prussia will only say yes to these. So this is anti-border go, this is pro just, getting things done. I like it. However, if you think the play is over just because France threw their weight behind the initiator and there isn't anyone strong enough to oppose them, you'd be wrong. It's possible for countries that have promised to back a side to betray that promise and go back to being undecided, or even switch side entirely, perhaps because the other side made an even juicier offer. Doing this, of course, makes them lose out on anything that was promised to them and negatively impacts on relation with a betrayed side. But otherwise, there is no limit to how many times a single country can switch sides in a diplomatic play. The AI will be rather reluctant to offer something to a country that has already forsaken them once, unless they desperately need their support, though. Really interesting mechanic. But this is where my balancing issues, or rather balancing concerns, come into play. We're looking at a situation where you as a player might be able to exploit this a lot by saying, hey, this country offered me a lot, now if you offer me more I can switch sides, right? That sort of stuff. Is it realistic? Yes. But is it difficult to balance? Yes, very much so. These things, there's a lot of free will basically in there that could make it impossible. Now, I do like actually the combination between being able to promising things and this being tied to maneuvers. Because you as the player, if you want to exploit this, hey, you might leave one side and then notice the other side doesn't have the maneuvers to actually invite you to get something. What is also interesting to me here is the question of, if you start a war, will you still be able to add war goals? In Victoria 2, of course, very bad system, quite frankly. We're looking at a situation where you can't add any war goals unless you have jingoism. Unless you're looking at a situation where, jingoism, I think it's like 6.9% of your population needs to be jingoist. I can't remember whether it's 6.9, but something like that anyway. And if they are jingoist, then you can add another war goal, but that's literally it. How do you do it within Warfare in Victoria 3? I'm very excited to find out about that, but I don't really care because, frankly, this is a great pre-war war goal system. I really, really love this. I think this is a tremendous step up, not just for Victoria, but for all grand strategy games. It directly explores the idea of this concert of powers, of people saying, I'm interested in this and that land, and if you promise it to me, we can talk about this. You can even cede, again, your own land to somebody else. Let's talk about, for example, Sardinia-Piedmont, saying, France, would you like to help me against Austria? And if you do help me, why don't I give you Nice and whatever that other section is. I can't remember that name, okay? But you know what I'm talking about. I like this a lot. I think this is a very good dynamic. Again, balancing issues are on my mind when it comes to this, because you can very effectively betray the AI in many circumstances that Paradox Games let you do something this freeform. Maybe they get a good grip on this, though. It's difficult to say. Until we play this, until we see the balancing, it is very difficult to say, but this is this is the most dynamic warfare declaration system that we have ever seen, be it a Paradox game, be it not a Paradox game. Period. That is exactly what this is. Now let's continue. This also means that trying to play it smart by burning through your maneuvers immediately to sway all the countries you think you need early in the play can backfire, as the other side is then free to try and bid over on your supporters while you are unable to do anything. Furthermore, it can also make it risky to not be upfront about your own territorial demands. Doing the swaying first and then saying, oh, and by the way, I want London, might result in your side of the play looking very empty all of a sudden as your former supporters scramble to distance themselves from you. Here, what is very important to me as well is this idea that you know which supporter will leave you if you do this. That is very, very important to me. You should be able to completely know whether, Russia will still support you or not. Because if they won't, then don't do that, right? But that is a big question. I definitely think the numbers, both for the players and the AI, this is very important to figure out. I hope they do figure it out. Swaying and adding demands during diplomatic maneuvering will also both pause escalation for some time when carried out, to make it possible for the other side to react even if those actions are taken right at the end of the phase. Peru abandoned Bolivia. Peru abandoned their support for Bolivia and the diplomatic play against Ecuador. Unlucky Bolivia. The final phase of the diplomatic play is countdown to war. Both sides are locked and it's no longer possible for countries to declare or abandon support for either side, nor is it possible to add new demands to any or do any swaying. In fact, the only thing that is possible during this phase is backing down, and this is usually the phase when you will see one of the sides give in, though it is also possible to back down during diplomatic maneuvering. I think we saw that earlier, right? Here it is. Look at the back down button right here. We could just say, I'll call it a day. Let's explore what happens if we do back down. Backing down is quite simply one side deciding that the odds aren't looking in their favor and deciding to concede the main demand of the other side to cut their losses. So only the main demand. If you do go to war and you lose, it's worse. It's considerably worse. And this also makes me wonder, you probably can't add any war goals during warfare because you already added them before you went to war. Maybe I'm wrong though. Hey, honestly, we'll see. It's important to note that that only the main demand is ever conceded in this way, so any additional demands that are either added or promised to supporters of the winning side are simply lost, with accrued infamy fully refunded, along with of course all the demands on the losing side. This means that there's actually in some cases a reason to want the play to escalate into war, and hence to not stack the odds in such a way that the other side sees no path to victory, as it is the only way in which you can simultaneously press multiple demands, war goals. Yeah, it doesn't sound like you can add any war goals during war, right? Assuming you're willing, or at least think you're willing, to bear the heavy costs of the war, it's possible to back down all the way up until the escalation meter hits 100, so once the circle closes, at which point the diplomatic play is over and war breaks out. This is very reminiscent of Crises in Victoria 2, but much expanded. Seriously, this is honestly the expansion that we've seen here is insane. Do you want to back down in the diplomatic play against Saxony? Come on, if you're gonna do that, it's pathetic. Don't back down against Saxony. Don't be ridiculous. Their primary war goal against us will be enforced. Now, I really love this dev diary. This is an absolutely great implementation of warfare connected to diplomacy, and I do think that it adds a lot. It also changes the relationship between vassal and overlord, because either you intervene or you don't intervene, and at the same time, as an overlord, if you want to annex one of your own puppets, you will have to do it via diplomatic play, and they may resist. I like this. This is a really, really good system, the best system that we've seen so far. I like in particular next week's dev diary though. Next week, we're going to be talking about something you've been rightfully curious about since the announcement: war. I am very excited about this. Now, before we finish off today, let's just take a look at some of the dev responses from last dev diary. It says there that tributaries and vassals are restricted to unrecognized powers. What happens, I had that question as well, if a nation becomes recognized and they have vassals or tributaries? If a country changes country type, its subjects are automatically converted to new appropriate types of subjects, so a vassal will become a territory, for instance. Makes a lot of sense. I can live with this. There's no grandfathering in, there's no legacy vassal type, they just are converted. Yeah, we're skipping a lot here, by the way. I do want to highlight that, but I found them to either be already answered in our video that I made last week, or we basically don't need to talk about it. So, we know dominions can be turned into territories, but can territories be turned into dominions? Can dominions become protectorates if they stop being colonies? I'm just thinking about the increasing autonomy Britain gave to many of its colonial subjects, such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, over the course of the mid to late 19th century and early 20th century, until they became de facto independent in almost all matters except foreign affairs. Subjects can start plays to get more autonomy or gain independence, and more autonomous subjects can even try to expand at the expense of other subjects of the same overlord, with the overlord able to take sides or to stay out of it. Basically, if you are Canada, you can say, Great Britain, I love being a subject, but hear me out here. What if I become independent though? Rather, what if you give me more autonomy though? These are basically, this is great news, although I wish there was another non-warfare escalation negotiation, because, like, would Canada really go to war if Great Britain said you can't have a parliament, for example, right? Either way, this is, again, a big step up when it comes to vassal relationships. In Hoi 4, you click a button if you have the amount of numbers, and then you become a different vassal type. This is significantly better. There's no other game that does it better at all, so this is already a step up. Now, let me see. If you can have a puppet give income, can it give other resources? In addition to the tributes some subjects may pay, subject nations also confer a portion of their prestige onto their overlord. Since they also tend to be in their overlord's market, they also supply goods, add to demand, provide a semi-mobile workforce, etc. There's currently no other transfers of resources planned, but the scriptable pact system makes it very easy to add, so not saying it's impossible. Basically, modders can put it in, and they can put it in if they need it for future content. I don't see personal unions being a thing under pacts. Off the top of my head, during this time, Norway under Sweden, Finland under Russia, Hanover under Britain till 1837, Hungary under Austria, and the Irish Free State under Britain were all personal unions. Guess they could fall under protectorates or puppets. However, this would obviously need some special representation in the politics tab. Personal union is also a type of relatively autonomous legacy subject. Some PUs exist at start of the game, but you can't make new ones. I will tell you, I do think the option to create personal unions would be nice. What this basically tells me, even away from the idea that you can't create personal unions, is the fact that they do not focus on dynastic gameplay in Victoria 3. Great Britain can't all of a sudden become one with Germany because of a personal union. Is it sad? To a degree. I personally would argue it is sad. To another degree, I will definitely say that personal unions in all games except CK3 are very poorly managed. In EU4, they suck. Like, it's so random whether they happen or not. There's a middle ground there. Don't get me wrong here. But unless they really are eager to implement that, I would rather not have it. I'll tell you straight up. Ultimately, you're looking at a situation where having it would be nice. Not having it, unless it is implemented well, is better, in my opinion, at the very least. So, let me know what you think in particular about personal unions. Again, it's a bit of a stepdaughter kind of relationship that, you know, we all have in these games, except again in CK3, where it is basically planned and very clear when a personal union will happen. But in EU4, for example, it's entirely random. It didn't really play a big role in Victoria 3. I just wish, like in the time frame, I just wish, you know, hey, if they implement it, doesn't take anything away, right? Now, either way, this is this Dev Diary. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, please take care of yourself. It is very important. And I'll see you next week. See you later. Alligator.